His lawyer stopped mid-sentence. Just stopped. The papers Caleb had been reaching for, the ones that would save his company, his investors, his entire empire, stayed exactly where they were and signed, in the center of that polished conference table in Washington, D.C. Someone across from us said calmly, almost gently, "This deal will not be moving forward." Caleb looked up, confused at first, then panicked. His eyes scanned the room like he was trying to understand who had just spoken, who had that kind of authority. And then he saw me, not seated beside him, not behind him with the assistants and junior associates, but at the head of the table where the decision-maker sits. For the first time in 3 years, I felt completely calm. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how we got here. How a woman who walked out of family court with nothing actually owned the one thing her ex-husband couldn't survive without. My name is Harper Rowe. I'm 35 years old, and until 3 years ago, I was married to Caleb Rowe. 12 years of marriage. That's longer than most startups survive, longer than most people stay in one city, and definitely longer than I should have ignored what was right in front of me. Before we continue, if you want to uncover what happens next in this shocking tale, and never miss another jaw-dropping twist, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. This support helps this channel bring you even more insane stories like this. Now let's jump deep into the story. I met Caleb when I was 23, fresh out of a graduate program in urban planning at Johns Hopkins. I'd taken a position with a small consulting firm in Phoenix. Not glamorous work, mostly compliance reviews and permit coordination for commercial developments. Caleb was 27, running a 2-person construction company out of a rented office in Tempe. He had ambition that filled a room, ideas that sounded like inevitable success, and a smile that made investors believe him. He talked about Phoenix like it was his city, like growth was a force he could personally command. He said he was going to build something that mattered. I said I could help him navigate the permitting process. Romance, right? We got married when I was 24. For the first few years, I worked part-time at the firm while helping Caleb establish Rowe Build development. I managed scheduling, vendor relationships, compliance paperwork, the unglamorous foundation that kept projects from collapsing under their own ambition. My grandmother always told me a woman should understand how money moves. Not to control it necessarily, but to see it clearly. To never be surprised by where it goes. By the time I was 27, Caleb's business had exploded. Paradise Valley contracts, investor interest, his face in Phoenix Business Journal. He asked me to come on full-time. He needed someone to manage operations, coordinate with city planners, handle the details he didn't have patience for. Someone he could trust completely. So I became his invisible infrastructure. For 8 years, I built systems while Caleb built his image. I tracked compliance deadlines while he closed deals at golf courses. I caught permit issues before they became problems while he accepted awards for visionary development. At every industry event, I was Caleb's wife. At every celebration, he thanked his investors, his contractors, his instincts. My name appeared on documents I drafted, filed under, prepared by office staff. Somewhere around year 9, things shifted. He started making expansion decisions without consulting me. Started dismissing my concerns about over-leveraging as thinking small. Started calling my risk assessments paranoid and my caution dead weight. Dead weight. That's what he called the person who'd kept his company compliant through 3 different municipal administrations. The warnings I gave him became background noise. The compliance reports I flagged went unread. When I pointed out that his Las Vegas expansion was built on overly optimistic timelines, he told me I didn't understand vision. When I mentioned that his Denver contracts had regulatory gaps, he said I was obsessed with paperwork instead of progress. When I asked why he was suddenly excluding me from planning meetings, he said he needed people who think bigger. He started staying late more often. Started password-protecting files on his laptop. Started having hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. I noticed. I said nothing. I just kept watching. Then 3 months ago, he came home on a Thursday evening. I was reviewing contract amendments at the kitchen island, his contracts, his deals, amendments I'd flagged for legal review. He sat down across from me with a look I'd never seen before. Not angry, not sad, just transactional. I want a divorce, he said. And I want the house, the company, the vehicles. You can keep whatever personal items fit in your car. He said it like he was outlining a business proposal. Clean separation, minimal disruption, No emotional complications. I just stared at him. 12 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. Across our kitchen island, between my laptop and his protein shake, like I was a lease he'd decided not to renew. I've already spoken with Gerald Whitmore, he continued. He'll send over the paperwork tomorrow. This doesn't have to be complicated, Harper. We can keep this civil. Gerald Whitmore, the most aggressive divorce attorney in Phoenix. The one who specialized in asset protection for high-net-worth clients. The one who'd helped 3 of Caleb's business associates leave their marriages with everything intact. You can keep your dignity, Caleb added, like he was offering me a generous severance package. Dignity, the consolation prize for women who built empires and got evicted from them. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly and closed my laptop. Okay, I said. He looked almost surprised, like he'd been prepared for tears, for pleading, for resistance. My calm unnerved him, but only for a moment. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, he said, standing up. I'll be in the guest room tonight. We can work out the details tomorrow. He left the kitchen. I sat there in the silence, staring at the marble countertop we'd chosen together 4 years ago. The house we'd renovated. The life we'd built. Or rather, the life I'd built while he collected the credit. What Caleb didn't know was that I wasn't being reasonable. I was being strategic. What Caleb didn't know was that I wasn't losing. I was leaving the battlefield. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Phoenix Family Court, 3rd floor, courtroom 7B. Fluorescent lighting, beige walls, the kind of institutional furniture that had witnessed 1,000 divorces and never once pretended to care. Caleb sat on the left side with his legal team. Gerald Whitmore, silver-haired and expensive, flanked by 2 associates who looked fresh out of law school but carried themselves like assassins. They had matching leather folders, matching fountain pens, matching expressions of absolute confidence. I sat on the right with Nina Castellano, the attorney I'd hired from my old consulting firm's referral list. She was good, experienced, thorough, but she wasn't a shark. She was a professional who believed in fairness, in equitable division, in the rules actually meaning something. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Gerald stood and began his presentation like he was pitching a corporate acquisition. He had slides. Actual slides. A financial breakdown of Rowe Development's growth trajectory, documentation of Caleb's sole proprietorship and vision, and a carefully constructed narrative about my role in the company. Mrs. Rowe provided administrative support, Gerald said, his voice smooth and practiced. Scheduling, basic coordination, clerical assistance. While her contributions are acknowledged, they do not constitute material involvement in the strategic or operational success of Rowe Development. Administrative support, clerical assistance. Words designed to make 12 years of work disappear. Nina objected, but weakly. She presented my emails, my compliance reports, documentation showing my name on permits and municipal filings. She argued for my share of the business, for recognition of my contributions. The judge listened politely. Then he reviewed Caleb's restructured ownership documents, the ones that had been filed 8 months ago, before the divorce was even announced. Documents that reclassified my position. Documents that transferred shares. Documents I'd never been asked to sign but that somehow existed anyway, buried in routine paperwork I'd processed without reading carefully because I trusted my husband. My own efficiency had been used against me. The judge ruled decisively. The Paradise Valley house, Caleb's. The company shares, Caleb's. The investment accounts, the vehicles, even the art collection I'd curated for our home office, all his. I received a settlement. Small, clean, final. Enough to rent an apartment and start over, but nowhere near half of what we'd built together. The court finds that Mr. Rowe has demonstrated clear majority ownership and operational control, the judge said. Mrs. Rowe is awarded a settlement reflecting her proportional contribution as documented. Proportional contribution, as documented by the man who'd spent 8 months erasing me from the paperwork. Nina looked devastated. She tried to argue, tried to motion for reconsideration, but the ruling was final. Caleb stood, shook Gerald's hand, and walked out without looking at me. I gathered my things slowly. Nina put her hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Harper. We can appeal this. We can. It's fine, I said. It's not fine. This is. Nina. I looked at her directly. It's fine. She didn't understand. Nobody did. Outside the courthouse, My sister was waiting. Melissa, 2 years younger, furiously typing on her phone. When she saw me, she practically ran over. "Tell me you're appealing," she said immediately. "Tell me you're not letting him get away with this." "I'm not appealing. Harper, he just stole 12 years of your life. He didn't steal anything I need." Melissa stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe everyone thought I had. The friends who called. The former colleagues who sent concerned messages. My mother, who suggested I find a good therapist and a better lawyer. They all saw the same thing. A woman who'd been discarded, a cautionary tale, a victim too broken to fight back. Let them think that. Let everyone think that. Because here's what they didn't know. The courtroom loss was strategic. Every asset Caleb took, I'd allowed him to take. Not because I was weak. Because I was patient. You see, when someone thinks you're defeated, they stop watching you. They stop being careful. They stop wondering what you might be planning. And that's exactly when you build something they'll never see coming. I'd learned that from my time at Johns Hopkins, studying under Professor Catherine Chun, who specialized in infrastructure financing. She used to say that real power in development doesn't come from the buildings you construct. It comes from controlling access to the money that makes construction possible. The person who owns the capital approval, she told us, owns the project. Everything else is just theater. I'd remembered that. 2 years before Caleb asked for a divorce, I'd started building something separate, something quiet, something that had nothing to do with Robuild development or Paradise Valley real estate or Phoenix construction contracts. I'd started positioning myself in a different game entirely. It began with a call from Marcus Breslin, an old colleague from my Baltimore days who'd moved into private infrastructure investment. He was putting together a fund focused on distressed municipal redevelopment projects, the kind of deals that required federal approval, state coordination, and private capital that most investors were too risk-averse to touch. "You understand compliance better than anyone I know," Marcus said. "And you know how to read municipal vulnerability. I need someone who can assess these deals properly." I came on as an advisor first, then a limited partner. Then, quietly, I started acquiring additional stakes through layered entities. Nothing flashy, nothing public, just careful, strategic positioning in a fund that most people in Phoenix had never heard of. While Caleb was chasing headlines and award ceremonies, I was building access. While he was expanding into Las Vegas and Denver with borrowed confidence and over-leveraged credit, I was learning exactly which federal projects were coming, which municipalities were desperate for private partnership, and which deals would require the kind of specialized approval that only a few entities could provide. One of those entities was mine. After the divorce was finalized, I moved into a modest apartment in Scottsdale. 1 bedroom, minimal furniture, the kind of place that screamed, starting over from nothing. I let Caleb keep the Paradise Valley house. Let him keep the cars. Let him keep every visible marker of success. Because I didn't need any of it. What I needed was for him to think I was defeated. What I needed was for him to expand recklessly, confident that he'd won, that I was no longer a factor in his calculations. And that's exactly what happened. Within 3 months of the divorce, Caleb announced a massive expansion. New projects in Las Vegas. A Denver development deal that would triple the company's footprint. A partnership with a California firm that looked impressive in press releases, but was built on extremely optimistic timelines and very little actual capital. I watched from a distance. Watched him miss compliance deadlines. Watched him burn through investor goodwill. Watched him make exactly the kind of decisions I used to catch before they became problems. Nobody was catching them anymore. Permits stalled. Lenders got nervous. Partners started asking harder questions. And then came the deal that would either save him or finish him. A federal redevelopment project. Multi-state infrastructure partnership. The kind of deal that could stabilize Robuild's credibility and attract new capital. The kind of deal that required private investment approval from a very specific, very selective fund. A fund that had rejected bigger names. A fund known for rigorous compliance standards. A fund that operated through blind trusts and layered entities and rarely did public interviews. Caleb's team spent weeks trying to secure a meeting. They had no idea who actually controlled the decision. The fund structure was deliberately opaque, designed to evaluate projects without the bias of personal relationships or reputation. Finally, they got a response. 1 meeting. Washington, D.C. Be prepared to present full compliance documentation. I can only imagine what Caleb thought when he got that email. Probably that his luck was finally turning, that his vision was finally being recognized, that he was about to be saved. He had no idea what was waiting for him in that boardroom. The really beautiful thing about patience is that it looks like weakness until it doesn't. 2 years before Caleb walked into my kitchen and asked for a divorce, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Baltimore, catching up with Marcus Breslin. I was in town for a municipal planning conference, one of those continuing education events that Caleb always said was a waste of time. You already know compliance, he'd say. Why do you need to sit in hotel conference rooms listening to bureaucrats talk about regulations? Because regulations change. Because relationships matter. Because the real conversations happen in the margins of those conferences, over coffee and cocktails, when people talk about what's actually happening instead of what's officially happening. Marcus and I had gone through the Hopkins program together. He'd gone into private equity after graduation, specializing in infrastructure deals that traditional investors avoided. Not because they weren't profitable, but because they required a specific kind of expertise that most financiers didn't have. Municipal redevelopment is starving for capital, Marcus said, stirring his coffee methodically. Federal money is there, state matching funds are allocated, but the projects can't move forward without private investment. And most private investors don't understand the risk profile well enough to commit. But the risk is actually lower than they think, I said, if you know how to read the compliance landscape. Exactly. He looked at me directly, which is why I want you involved. That's how it started. Not with a grand plan, not with revenge in mind, just with an opportunity that made intellectual sense. Marcus was building a fund, Horizon Infrastructure Partners, focused specifically on distressed municipal projects that had federal backing but needed private capital to move forward. The fund would evaluate projects based on compliance viability, not just financial projections. Most investors look at the return model, Marcus explained. We'd look at the regulatory pathway. Can this project actually get built? Does it meet federal standards? Are the local approvals realistic? It was exactly the kind of analysis I'd been doing for Caleb for years. Except this time, I'd own the outcome. I came on as a compliance advisor initially, reviewing project applications, assessing regulatory risk, flagging potential delays before they became deal killers. But Marcus saw what I saw, that my expertise was worth more than advisor fees. I want you as a limited partner, he said after our third deal together. Not a massive stake. I know you're managing cash carefully with Caleb's business, but enough that you're invested in the fund's success. I said yes. Started small. Used money I'd kept separate, not hidden from Caleb, but separate. Money my grandmother had left me. Money I'd saved from my consulting work before going full-time with Rowe Build. Over the next 18 months, as Caleb got more reckless and dismissive, I quietly increased my position in Horizon. Not with huge infusions of cash, but strategically. Reinvesting advisory fees. Acquiring stakes from partners who wanted liquidity. By the time Caleb announced he wanted a divorce, I owned 17% of Horizon Infrastructure Partners. Nobody knew. The fund structure was deliberately opaque, layered through LLCs and blind trusts specifically designed to let investors maintain privacy. It was standard practice in infrastructure investing, where public perception can derail deals before they start. Caleb certainly didn't know. He barely paid attention to what I did anymore. My work had become background noise in his narrative of self-made success. That was fine with me, because while he was building an empire on credit and confidence, I was building something more valuable: access. The thing about infrastructure deals is that they're not really about money. Money is everywhere. What's scarce is the ability to navigate the regulatory maze that turns federal funding into actual construction. Most developers see compliance as a barrier. I saw it as a moat, and I'd just positioned myself on the inside of that moat. After the divorce, after the courtroom humiliation, after everyone stopped watching me carefully, I made my move. Marcus called 6 weeks after the final settlement. One of our limited partners wants to exit, he said. Family estate issue, needs liquidity immediately. It's a 9% stake. First refusal goes to existing partners. How much? I asked. He told me. It was more than my settlement. More than I had in accessible cash. Give me 2 days, I said. I sold everything Caleb had left me in the settlement. The small investment account, some stock options that had vested, jewelry that had sentimental value, but real market value too. It still wasn't enough. So I did something I'd sworn I wouldn't do. I called my sister. Melissa had money. Her husband was a cardiologist, and they'd been saving for a vacation home in Sedona. I asked her for a short-term loan. Promised to pay it back with interest. Didn't explain what it was for. Is this for an appeal? She asked. Because if you're finally fighting back. It's not for an appeal. It's for something better. Do you trust me? There was a long pause. Yeah, she said finally. I trust you. 2 days later, I wired Marcus the money. Acquired the 9% stake. That gave me 26% of Horizon Infrastructure Partners, the single largest individual stake in the fund. Not controlling interest. Not decision-making power on my own. But enough that nothing moved forward without my consent. While I was doing this, Caleb was expanding. He announced the Las Vegas project first. Southwest Urban Village, a mixed-use development that would require coordinating with Clark County, navigating Nevada's environmental regulations, and managing water rights in a desert city with increasingly strained resources. It was exactly the kind of complex, multi-jurisdictional deal that required someone who understood regulatory sequencing. Caleb didn't have that anymore. He'd divorced that person. The project immediately hit delays. Permit applications filed in the wrong order. Environmental assessments that missed key requirements. Water rights documentation that had gaps. Nothing fatal on its own. But together, they created a pattern that made lenders nervous. Then came Denver. Mile High Commons, another ambitious mixed-use project that would transform a distressed neighborhood through public-private partnership. More complexity, more jurisdictional coordination, more opportunities for regulatory failure. Caleb was confident. He always was. He hired new project managers, brought on consultants, threw money at problems like money alone could solve them. It couldn't. 6 months after the divorce, Rowe Development had 3 stalled projects, declining investor confidence, and a reputation for missing deadlines. Caleb needed a win. Something big enough to stabilize credibility. Something that would bring capital back. That's when the federal redevelopment opportunity emerged. It was perfect for him. Multi-state infrastructure project, federal backing. Exactly the kind of high-profile deal that could restore Rowe's reputation. There was just one problem. It required final approval from a private infrastructure fund. A fund that specialized in compliance review. A fund known for rigorous standards. A fund that had rejected proposals from bigger, more established developers. A fund called Horizon Infrastructure Partners. Caleb's team spent 2 months trying to secure a meeting. They submitted documentation, responded to questions, revised proposals. Finally, they got a response. 1 meeting. Washington, D.C. bring complete compliance documentation. I can picture Caleb when he got that email. The relief. The vindication. Proof that his vision was being recognized. He had no idea. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. 2 weeks away. Caleb would fly in Wednesday night, present Thursday morning, hopefully walk out with approval that same day. I'd be there too, but not the way he expected. I called Marcus the night the meeting was scheduled. I want to attend, I said. You don't usually sit in on presentations. I know, but this one's different. There was a pause. Marcus was smart. He'd known about my divorce, known about Caleb, but he'd never pressed for details. Is this the Phoenix developer? Rowe. Yes. Another pause. You're sure you want to be there? I'm sure. Okay. But Harper. I know, I said. This is business. It stays business. I wasn't worried about you, Marcus said. I was worried about him. I smiled. Don't be. He's not going to make a scene. How do you know? Because the moment he sees me, he'll realize he already lost. The thing about Washington, D.C. is that power doesn't announce itself. It just exists, quietly and absolutely, in rooms most people never enter. The Horizon Infrastructure Partners office was in a building near Farragut Square. Understated exterior, minimalist lobby. The kind of space that looked almost boring until you realized everyone walking through it was managing 9-figure deals. I arrived at 8:30 a.m. The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Marcus met me in the lobby. He's already here, he said quietly. Arrived 20 minutes early. Nervous energy. How does he look? Like a man who needs this deal very badly. We took the elevator to the 12th floor. The Horizon conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a long glass table, and the kind of careful neutrality that made everyone in it equal until someone spoke and shifted the balance. Caleb was sitting on one side of the table with his lawyer, not Gerald Whitmore, but someone younger, someone who specialized in development deals rather than divorces. They had documents spread out, a tablet with slides queued up, 2 copies of a pitch deck bound in expensive leather folders. He looked up when the door opened, saw Marcus, smiled with professional warmth, then saw me. The smile didn't fade immediately. For a second, he seemed confused, like he was trying to place me in the wrong context. Like running into your dentist at a concert and not quite processing why they're there. Then understanding hit. His face went pale. Actually pale. I watched the color drain like someone had opened a valve. Harper. He said it like a question, like maybe he was seeing things. I walked to the head of the table. Didn't sit beside him. Didn't sit opposite him. Sat where the decision-maker sits. Marcus sat to my right. Our general counsel, Patricia Okafor, sat to my left. Mr. Rowe, Marcus said evenly, thank you for coming. I believe you've met Harper Rowe, our senior partner and majority stakeholder. Senior partner. Majority stakeholder. Words that rearranged reality. Caleb stared at me, then at Marcus, then back at me. His lawyer whispered something urgent. Caleb didn't respond. I think there's been some misunderstanding, Caleb said finally. His voice was careful, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. Harper and I, we're divorced. We don't work together anymore. There's no conflict of interest, I said calmly. Horizon Infrastructure Partners has no business relationship with Rowe Development. This is a standard project evaluation. But I've been with Horizon for over 2 years, Caleb. This isn't new. I watched him do the math. 2 years. Before the divorce. During the marriage. While he was calling me dead weight and dismissing my concerns and hiding documents. Shall we begin? Marcus said. Caleb's lawyer leaned in, whispered urgently. Caleb shook his head slightly, then nodded, then seemed unable to decide. Finally, he opened the pitch deck. Rowe Development is prepared to partner with Horizon on the Federal Corridor Redevelopment Initiative, he began. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. The tablet shook almost imperceptibly. This is a transformative project that will. Let's start with compliance documentation, I interrupted gently. Before we discuss vision, I need to understand your regulatory positioning. Caleb paused. Of course. We've submitted full documentation. You've submitted applications, I said. What I'm asking about is your compliance pathway. What's your timeline for EPA approval? We're in consultation with. Do you have preliminary findings? They're pending. And your water rights coordination with the 3 affected municipalities? Caleb glanced at his lawyer. We're in active negotiation. Have you secured contingent approvals pending federal clearance? We're working toward. Do you have them? Silence. It wasn't a long silence. Maybe 5 seconds. But in that room, with that question hanging, it stretched. Not yet, Caleb admitted. I nodded. Pulled up a document on my tablet. Your environmental assessment has gaps in the watershed analysis. Your permit sequencing assumes parallel processing that isn't available in 2 of the 3 jurisdictions. Your timeline for federal approval is optimistic by at least 7 months based on current EPA workload. Caleb stared at me. How do you? This is what I do, Caleb. This is what I've always done. The room was very quiet. Patricia spoke next. Mr. Rowe, Horizon's investment model is built on regulatory certainty. We don't fund vision. We fund viable pathways to completion. I can get these approvals, Caleb said. Desperation crept into his voice. I just need the capital commitment to solve problems you don't fully understand yet. I finished. Problems that should have been identified in preliminary planning. Problems that will delay this project by at least a year and increase costs by 30%. Harper, please. He said it quietly. Drop the professional pretense. Just said my name like we were still people who knew each other. Please. I looked at him directly for the first time since sitting down. This isn't personal, I said. It's risk assessment. And you're too exposed. I can restructure. I can bring on new expertise. I can. You can't, I said simply. Your company is over-leveraged. Your investors are nervous. Your reputation for meeting deadlines is damaged. Even if we provided capital, this project would fail because Rowe doesn't have the operational stability to execute it. Caleb's lawyer tried to interject. With respect, Mrs. Rowe. Ms. Rowe, I corrected. Ms. Rowe, surely there's room for negotiation here. If the concern is expertise, Mr. Rowe can bring on additional consultants. If it's timeline, we can adjust projections. The concern, I said evenly, is fundamental. This isn't about adding resources. It's about whether the core entity can deliver. And based on our analysis, it can't. I looked at Marcus. He nodded slightly. Horizon Infrastructure Partners is declining to move forward with this project, I said. We appreciate your time, Mr. Rowe. Caleb stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. You're doing this because of the divorce. Because you're angry. I'm doing this because your project doesn't meet our standards, I said. If we funded every ambitious developer who needed rescue, we wouldn't be a fund. We'd be a charity. Harper, I made mistakes. I know I did. I'm sorry. But you can't. You can't destroy my company because... I'm not destroying anything, Caleb. My voice stayed level. I'm declining to save it. There's a difference. He tried one more time. What about the work we did together? What about everything we built? We didn't build it together, I said quietly. I built it. You took credit. And when you didn't need me anymore, you erased me from the story. Now you need me again, and you're surprised that the story already ended. Patricia stood. Mr. Rowe, our counsel will send formal notification by end of business today. Thank you for your time. Caleb looked at his lawyer, who was already packing up the pitch deck. Looked at Marcus, who was checking his phone like the meeting was already over. Looked at me. I met his eyes. Stayed calm. Said nothing. He walked out. Didn't storm. Didn't slam the door. Just walked out like a man who'd already vanished. The room was quiet for a moment after the door closed. Well, Patricia said. That was professional. It was, Marcus agreed. He looked at me. You okay? I'm fine, I said. And I was. Because this wasn't about emotion. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice in any meaningful sense. It was about consequences. About what happens when you treat people like they're disposable and then realize you needed them the entire time. About what happens when you think power is about control, when actually it's about access. About what happens when you erase someone from your story and then discover they were writing a different story all along. Caleb left that building thinking I destroyed him out of spite. He was wrong. I just declined to save him. There's a difference. And sometimes, that difference is everything. The collapse happened quietly. That's the thing nobody tells you about ruin. It's rarely dramatic. There's no explosion, no spectacular crash, no moment where everything clearly ends. It's just a series of doors closing, one after another, until you realize there's nowhere left to go. Within 2 weeks of the DC meeting, Robuild's lenders started making calls. Casual at first, just checking in, just reviewing timelines. Then more pointed. Questions about capital reserves. Questions about alternative funding sources. Questions about whether Caleb had backup plans. He didn't. The Las Vegas project stalled completely. Permits that had been pending became under review. Then additional information required. Then just silence. The Denver deal collapsed when his primary partner pulled out. Something about misaligned expectations and confidence in execution capability. Corporate language for, we don't trust you anymore. Caleb tried to find alternative investors. Pitched to venture funds, private equity firms, anyone who'd take a meeting. But word travels fast in development circles. Everyone knew the federal deal had fallen through. Everyone wondered why Horizon had passed. If Horizon, a fund known for taking calculated risks on complex projects, had declined, what did that say about Robuild's viability? 3 months after DC, Caleb sold the Paradise Valley house. Not to downsize, to generate liquidity. For months after, he laid off half his staff. 5 months after, Robuild Development quietly filed for dissolution. No press release. No public statement. Just paperwork processed through the Arizona Corporation Commission. The company didn't explode. It didn't scandal. It just stopped existing. I learned about it through Marcus, who mentioned it casually during a project review call. That Phoenix developer you knew, he said. Robuild. Looks like they've shut down. I saw that, I said. Which was true. I'd seen the filing. You okay? I'm fine. Good. Because we have 3 new projects to review this week, and I need you focused. I smiled. Send me the files. That was it. That was the extent of my reaction to Caleb's collapse. A brief acknowledgement, and then back to work. Because that's how power actually works. It's not about grand gestures or public victories. It's about moving forward while other people are still trying to understand what happened. I moved to Seattle 6 months later. Not running. Not hiding. Just expanding. Marcus and I had been discussing opening a West Coast office for Horizon. The infrastructure needs were enormous. Crumbling bridges, outdated transit systems, cities desperate for sustainable redevelopment. Federal funding was available, but as always, the challenge was navigating the regulatory complexity. I took over the Seattle office as regional director, hired a small team, started evaluating projects throughout Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. The work was exactly what I'd been doing in Phoenix, except now I owned the outcome. Now my name was on the door. Now when projects succeeded, I got the credit. Not because I demanded it, just because it was accurate. I funded civic housing projects, transit improvements, green infrastructure, the kind of work that actually mattered, that improved people's lives instead of just generating impressive press releases. I lived intentionally. A modest apartment in Capitol Hill, a manageable car, no social media presence, no networking events unless they were directly relevant to projects. My grandmother used to say that real wealth is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. She was right. 2 years after Seattle, I attended a transportation infrastructure summit in San Francisco. Regional planners, federal officials, private investors, everyone who shaped how cities actually functioned. I was presenting a case study on a Seattle light rail expansion we'd helped fund, showing how proper regulatory planning had cut the timeline by 18 months and saved the project nearly $40 million. After the presentation, I was standing near the conference hall entrance, checking my phone, when I saw him. Caleb. He was crossing the lobby, heading toward one of the breakout sessions. Older, grayer, wearing a suit that looked expensive but tired. He carried a conference folder, a name badge that identified him as attending, not presenting. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. For a second, we just looked at each other across 30 feet of marble floor and scattered conference attendees. I nodded politely, the kind of acknowledgement you give a former colleague you haven't seen in years. Professional, neutral. He nodded back. His expression was complicated, something between regret and resignation and acceptance. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. Didn't pause. Didn't look back. Just kept walking. Because that's the thing about closure. It's not a conversation. It's not a confrontation. It's not even forgiveness, really. It's just the absence of needing anything from someone who once had the power to take everything. The door didn't slam. It was already closed. I still think about Caleb sometimes. Not often. Not with anger. Just occasionally. The way you might think about a house you used to live in or a city you've moved away from. I wonder if he understands now. If he's figured out that what happened in that DC boardroom wasn't revenge, it was consequence. The natural result of treating people like they're disposable and then being surprised when they don't save you. I wonder if he knows that I didn't destroy his company. I just declined to rescue it. That distinction matters. I wonder if he's told the story to anyone. If he's sitting in some bar in Phoenix explaining to a friend how his ex-wife ruined him. Or if he's honest enough to admit he ruined himself. Probably the former. People rarely see their own role in their collapse. But it doesn't matter. Not really. Because I'm not in his story anymore. I'm not the supporting character who disappeared. I'm not the invisible infrastructure that held everything together. I'm the protagonist of my own story now. One where power isn't about control or credit or making sure everyone knows your name. It's about access. It's about understanding how systems actually work. It's about being underestimated and using that as strategic advantage. My grandmother told me once that the best revenge is living well. But I don't think that's quite right. The best revenge is not needing revenge at all. It's building something so separate, so self-sufficient, so entirely yours that what happened in the past becomes irrelevant to your future. That's what I did. That's what I'm still doing. And Caleb? Caleb is a man I used to know who made choices he has to live with. That's his story now. Mine is just beginning.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.